What 4 factors could contribute to a hostile work environment? If you ever worked in a hostile work environment, you know how frustrating it can be. And I think there's 4 key factors. Now again, this is just from my experience, but I just see these 4 key factors really affecting how the work environment, whether it's positive or hostile or negative. So with that, my name is Chris Richardson. I'm a coach here at Life on Your Terms, and I make these videos here so you can do exactly that. You can live a life on your terms. So what are the 4 factors that could contribute to a hostile work environment? Now, before I get into this, I'd imagine you clicked on this video because you feel like you do have a hostile work environment, or you think you might have a hostile work environment. That's where I encourage you to take the balance wheel in the description below. The reason I encourage this is because it doesn't only touch on job environment, it talks about job satisfaction, job compensation, but it doesn't just touch on the professional side of things. We also look at relationships, health, and resources, because we here at Life on Your Terms firmly believe that these are all integrated and they all affect each other. So I'd encourage you to start there, and that can be helpful to identify. So I'm gonna identify 4 factors, and I'm gonna talk about the one simple fix that can fix all 4. So the first one, ineffective leadership. Now, before I get into this, it's not just to place the blame on leadership, but it is possible that the leadership is poor within your work environment. So with that, what does poor leadership look like? It looks like poor communication, micromanagement, and inconsistent enforcement of policies. I see those 3 as the key to a hostile work environment. So with poor communication, they don't communicate about anything, and you're unclear about your role or your objectives or whatever you're responsible for. That can create frustration. Micromanagement, it seems like they distrust you, so they micromanage you and they don't let you just operate within your means. That can create a hostile work environment as well. Also, inconsistent enforcement of policies. For example, let's say these managers or this leadership team says, hey, we want you guys to be always productive when you're at your desks or doing whatever, when you're online, whatever it is, they want you always to be productive. And then they themselves are not always productive, whether they're talking or they're just messing around. Whatever it is, they're not setting that example of the enforcement of policies, and that can create distrust as well. Now, the second factor that can contribute to a hostile work environment is workplace conflict. What does this look like? Well, you could have coworker tension due to culture or other reasons. Sometimes problems arise within a company and conflicts happen between coworkers, but the key is that you resolve these conflicts. If you don't resolve these conflicts, they just go unspoken and they're never fixed, and that can cause tension between those coworkers or a group of people, whatever it may be, and that can cause a hostile work environment. Now, on top of that, excessive competition. Now, competition is great. It keeps us motivated, it keeps people driven, so it's a good thing to have competition. But if you have excessive competition to the point where that's the only recognition you get is when you compete with your coworkers, that can lead to sabotage and, again, distrust. And as I've pointed out, distrust is a common theme in a hostile work environment, so it's crucial to avoid that. Now, the third factor that can contribute to a hostile work environment is unclear policies and procedures. Now, this ties in closely to the enforcement of policies, but with unclear policies and procedures, it can cause confusion and frustration. Different enforcement can lead to distrust. Like I said, if they don't enforce the same policies on themselves as they do you, whatever that looks like, or also no accountability. So there's a policy in place, and the person's not being held responsible for the misconduct that they have. All these things, again, lead to mistrust, which leads to a hostile work environment. Now, the final factor that I personally believe can lead to a hostile work environment is high levels of stress and burnout. Now, I'm not saying that you shouldn't be stressed out sometimes with work, because it's natural to be stressed out. Sometimes stress can be a good thing to help us get things done and keep us going, for lack of a better term for stress. So with that, if you have an excessive workload that you just can't keep up with, that can cause high levels of stress and burnout. If you have lack of recognition for how hard you are working, that can cause a hostile work environment. And sometimes you don't need recognition for everything you do. Sometimes the work just needs done, but it does feel good if you work really hard on something to get that recognition. And without that, that can cause stress and burnout. And then also work-life integration. Why did I say work-life balance? Because work-life balance is dead. With how connected we are with our jobs, with our phones and our computers, stuff like that, it's now work-life integration. You need to be able to bounce back and forth between your work and your life, and you can never really escape either of them, if that makes sense. So it's work-life integration, and if that's out of whack in your definition of it, that can cause problems and burnout as well. And then the final piece of high levels of stress is lack of support. If you're taking on a problem on your own and you have no support throughout the journey, that can cause a lot of stress and burnout as well. So it's important to avoid that. Now, what was that one simple fix that I talked about in the beginning? I really truly believe the one simple fix to these 4 factors is simply to lead by example. Lead by example, whether you're at the top or you're at the bottom. If you want communication to be better, your communication is top tier. If you want micromanaging to be better as a manager, you don't micromanage. If you want policies and procedures to be clear and it's easy to follow, you make your policies and your procedures clear and easy to follow. And with that, once you have and lead by example, then you can have those conversations with people because you live it. You live what you want to change. And I think the way you approach it is tactfully and respectfully. You say, hey, do you mind having a one-on-one conversation about these things? I have a few things to bring up that I think are hurting the work environment. And I bet you most people will be reasonable enough to listen as long as you approach it in a tactful and respectful way that is in the terms of company success and work environment success for those around you and yourself.